Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to our meeting. Can I welcome Roger along to his first meeting as our second non-voting member? Welcome, Roger. Are there any apologies for the meeting? Robert, we're hoping will join us in due course. I think everyone else is pretty much here.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Are there any declarations of interest in relation to any of the items on today's agenda? No, we'll move then to the minute of our last meeting from back in June. We'll run through it first for accuracy. Page 3 in the papers. 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, are we happy to accept that as an accurate minute? I'm seeing nodding heads, which is always a good sign. Are there any matters arising that don't come up elsewhere in the agenda? I didn't have anything. Did anyone else? No. Okay, we'll move on to item 4 then, which is the audited annual accounts for 21-22. Are you going to kick this one off, Stephen?
Yes, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. So the purpose of this report is to present the 2021-22 annual accounts for Falkirk Integration Joint Board to the Audit Committee for approval. In terms of background, draft accounts were submitted to external audit back in June 22, in line with the regulatory requirements. And following the audit process, there's now a requirement for the audited accounts to be approved for signature by either the IJB board or by the audit committee by a 30th of September 2022 deadline. The audited accounts themselves are included as Appendix 1, and within that there's a separate page numbering system. And you will see that on pages 45 through to 48 of the accounts, they include the independent auditor's report. Now, this outlines the scope of the audit, the responsibilities of the Chief Finance Officer, the Audit Committee and external audit for the financial statements, and most importantly today, the independent auditor's report provides an unqualified opinion on the accounts. The external auditors also produce an annual report, and this has been included as Appendix 2. The report provides further details of the audit, including the 4 wider scope dimensions of financial management, financial stability, governance and transparency, and value for money. And that allows the auditors to assess the IJB's ability to demonstrate best value in its activities. The Appendix D of the annual report includes an action plan with 5 recommended actions, 2 of which are classed as grade 1 and 3 are classed as grade 2. The recommendations and the management response are summarised going back to the covering report within a table in section 5.2 of the covering report. So to the recommendations are for the Audit Committee to approve the audited annual accounts for Falkirk Integration Joint Board for 2021-22 and to consider the external audit annual report contained within Appendix 2. So that's quite a brief canter through what is a large paper, the largest part of the papers. I'll open it up for questions next, if that's okay. I should also mention that Grace Scanlon is here from EY, so there's 2 of us here if there's any wider questions or context that you would like to ask today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Grace, is there anything you want to add at this stage?
Well, I do my little introduction to our report as well, just so we can get asked questions all at the same time. When I joined, I think you were talking about the papers, and so I will start by apologising about the lateness of our paper. I think that was my fault for separating out the action plan and the actual report and causing confusion, so sorry about that. I guess I kind of want to start by saying that this is our last annual report for the IGB, which I can't kind of believe. So after the accounts are approved and signed, then our last responsibilities are to hold handover meetings with your new auditors and allow them access to our files to hopefully get them up to speed quickly. And I guess just to say that we're also early, so the deadlines for the audits this year have been pushed back until the end of October, and we're actually hearing that lots will be signed in November this year. So to get to this stage with a brand new Chief Finance Officer is really an accomplishment. So I would like to thank Stephen in particular for all of his hard work in getting us here. So you'll note that the report that we're presented today is a draft, so we do have a few minor updates to make prior to finalising it later today and submitting it to the board for your records. So page 8 really outlines the steps that were outstanding at the time that we finalised this version of the report. But since then, we have reviewed obviously the updated financial statements, and our review stages are now complete. So we are ready to sign this afternoon, and I'm happy to give that unqualified opinion as we set out on page 3. We also set out on page 3 that there were no changes required to our audit approach or the level that we set materiality at for the board. Also on page 3, we note on our comments on going concern that we do expect that the functions of IGB will transfer to another body under the new National Care Service. And some of our IGBs have asked quite a lot of questions about going concern, in particular for a body that will effectively no longer exist. But we have explained here and on page 12 that in public sector audits, there is a presumption that the organisation will remain a going concern if the funding and the provision of services will continue in another guise. So because we fully expect social care services to be provided in Falkirk and to be funded, then that presumption holds true. If I turn to our wider scope work, then on the one hand, we are reflecting that substantial increase in the IGB's reserves balances, but also again stressing that in the medium term, then the outlook remains challenging. And so as you'd expect, then we've again reflected the need to develop a formal medium-term financial plan, really to support the new strategic plan once it has been finalised. Within financial management, we are satisfied that financial monitoring remains robust despite the change in personnel, but we have highlighted that there is pressure on the financial capacity of the IJB. And really, since the advent of the pandemic, then we have noticed that administrative burden increase, particularly for CFOs. So, for example, accounting for COVID funding and of course, previous financial plans have had to basically be rewritten because of the impact of the pandemic. While that role to make sure the board has information it needs continues. So while we do understand that from Stephen that there is a business case developed for a new accountant, then I guess we wanted to kind of raise that to your attention, and more widely we can see areas of pressure on areas like procurement for IGBs. So it is just worth making sure that that support that you receive from partners is adequate. Within governance, then we do make a comment on audit committee attendance through the year, although I think that's now been resolved as well with the new appointment. And more widely, we're continuing that theme about making sure you have enough resource to be able to close down some of these recommendations. And while it is the responsibility of partners, then the work to update the integration scheme still hasn't been resolved. In value for money, then we're reflecting that performance reporting arrangements are good, and we're satisfied that the board receives robust information. But like other IGBs, then performance has been really challenging throughout the pandemic, and Falkirk currently falls behind the national average. And finally, we've highlighted in best value that the Accounts Commission have flagged a change in plans for best value audits for IJBs. So if you remember last year, we were talking about there being a specific programme of best value audits for IJBs. Instead, they have flagged that there will be another national performance audit on integration, which we think will very much follow the same process as it did the last one, which was I think in 2019. At that time, then Falkirk IGB conducted a self-assessment against the MSG recommendations, and it really was quite hard reading at that time. So we thought it would be a good time to reassess that, just in preparation for another national performance audit. That was all I really wanted to comment on. And as Brian said, I'm very happy to take questions. But as this is probably my last audit committee, then I would also like to thank Stephen and Patricia formally for all the support that they've given us, particularly Patricia over the last 6 years. I hope that some of the momentum that has developed will continue, whatever the arrangements look like in future. And I wish you all the very best.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, yes, we don't know quite what the future will look like, but I think you're obviously right to say there will be some sort of body delivering social care in Falkirk in the future. And what the relationship is to the IJB and the new care board remains to be seen. Okay, so we've got the accounts. Crucial word for me is always unqualified. That's always a good sign in a set of accounts. I think, again, this year we're in the curious position of having a difficult financial position, but a very high level of reserves, and we know the reasons for that. My understanding is that there is some issue with Scottish Government looking to reclaim, if that's the correct technical term, some of the reserves that's there. Now, does that have any impact on the accounts? Because in effect, the Scottish Government then sort of become a creditor?
Well, I take this. It doesn't. So we've actually consulted on this just to check that it doesn't. But because there isn't any clear plan about how much that would be or when it would be, or even if it would impact Falkirk, because you could see a scenario where it wouldn't. And there's not an actual number attached to it, so we can't say it's material or it's not material. So based on the guidance that we sought from our internal team and Audit Scotland, then it is not an adjusting event.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. Any other members have questions or comments on the accounts? Nope. Okay, sorry, Fiona.
Sorry, my mouse isn't working properly. It's very annoying. I suppose it was just to say thank you to Stephen and Grace. I mean, I agree with Roger's comments earlier on. They were really really easy to read and helpful explanations. And I think Gordon covered the actual question I had, but I think it was just to say thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Okay, there are a fair amount of issues outstanding, some of which you mentioned, Grace, and we'll come to them in terms of future planning in due course. For now, are we happy to agree the recommendations in the report? Yeah, again, I'm seeing nods. Okay, can I then add my thanks on behalf of the committee to Grace, Stephen and everyone involved for getting this done so speedily. It's great to have that concluded and out the way. Thanks very much. Can we move on then to item 5, which I think is risk, if I can get my papers in the right order. Stephen, are you taking us through this one?
Yes, please, Gordon. I'll do this one as well. So agenda item 5 is the Strategic Risk Register, and the paper provides an update on the IJB's current Strategic Risk Register. There are 9 live risks on the Strategic Register, 8 are high risk and 1 is a medium risk. No new risks have been added to the register since the previous version presented to the last Audit Committee in June earlier this year. In terms of background, effective risk management is a fundamental aspect of good corporate governance, plays a key role in supporting delivery of the IJB's strategic plan and priorities. The Strategic Risk Register is regularly reviewed by the senior leadership team and by this committee, and it's also presented to the IJB board biannually, most recently just earlier this very month at the start of September. The table in section 4.1 provides an overview of the 9 active risks, while Appendix 1 provides further detail on each of the risks. Appendix 1 is in a new format for the Audit Committee, designed to make the detail more presentable. It still shows the untreated current and target scores together with current and further controls, and shows the last review information. But hopefully that presentation is more readable for the committee. Section 4.3 of the report notes that while there was no overall change to the register, the risk rating for each of the 9 risks. They have all been reviewed, and some of the key considerations are listed in the various bullet points on pages 67 and 68. Strategic risk will continue to be subject to regular review as part of the IGIB's risk management framework, and the legal and risk implications section of the report notes the serious consequences if we did not have an effective risk management strategy in place. So finally, the Audit Committee is asked to consider and comment on both the high-level risk register and the detailed strategic risk register. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. So there are no material changes either in the number of risks or the ratings. We remain with an awful lot of risks rated high, but that's probably just an accurate record of where we are right now in relation to some of these issues. So it's good that we recognise that and are taking the actions to mitigate and to control. Are there any questions or comments anyone wants to raise? Tony?
Thanks, Chair. I suppose the starting point was a comment you made earlier about the Scottish Government and the financial position. And whilst it might not have an impact on the accounts, I think if we consider the external environment at the moment, there is a question, particularly I would say, about the target risks. So, you know, and you're the Audit Committee, and obviously you would have a view as to what the current risks, and we will do audit work that will, you know, either confirm or suggest changes to the current scores. There are 2 things I think I'd like to say. One is something we're pushing quite strongly across our client base is that a target score doesn't mean much unless it's accompanied by a target timescale. And I think that's tremendously important. So, you know, if we can say financial consequences are a 3, well, do you know what? It's not going to be next year, is it? It could be in 5 years' time. So you can't tell whether that's a sensible target or not unless you've got a time frame. And there is a sense in which there's no strict rules about a risk register. It's a tool. It's a means to an end. It's a means of alerting you. So let's say, for example, in the long term, we could get to a 12, but next year it's going to be 25, and there's no way of ducking that. That's probably the most important information. So there needs to be, I think, a bit of thoughtfulness about a timescale to go with those scores. And that, of course, will link, because I'll see in the later paper there's something about setting risk appetite and having a timescale and understanding the actions required and what you as a board perhaps need to do, because it's not just about officers. Sometimes a lot of these issues will be strategic. I think a timescale would be really helpful there. But overall, and yeah, I'm an auditor, I tend not to be the most positive of people. I would look at some of those target scores, and my initial view, and just coming into the organisation, so this isn't based on Falkirk per se, but on my understanding of the general environment, is we know the issues with workforce, and I have a reasonable understanding of the national picture, and indeed some of the things in the National Health and Social Care Strategy that may or may not be deliverable. So I would definitely say that on the workforce and finance, there are real issues as to whether those target timescales are achievable in the short to medium term. And that will have an impact on the delivery of the strategic plan and the ability of your partner bodies, not just the Health Board and Council, but the third sector, the private sector, all of whom are suffering the same pressures to deliver. So I think it's probably a good time to think about those external pressures, particularly when you're doing the risk appetite work shortly, to really have a think about those target scores and when they'll be achieved and what the short to medium term looks like. Because I think we all know it's not going to be cosy the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's fair comment, Tony. I mean, we know that both finance and workforce are major national issues and are going to be so for the next few years, and given the advent of NCS, which we've already mentioned, towards the end of this Parliament, then that's probably about as far as we can look with any degree of certainty right now, because we don't know what the future will bring. Can we think then, perhaps in relation to the next paper rather than this one, about how we think about timescales in terms of reducing risk from current to target? Fiona?
Yeah, I suppose just a general comment, and I guess we're particularly when we're looking at the risk sharing agreement and how we develop that. I suppose some of the pressures that are shown, for example, that it's specifically mentioned around the hospital site, and I suppose it's about trying to reflect some of the risks on the council side as well, and particularly in terms of really challenging financial situation, and what does that feel like, and does it impact on the IGIB's risk register? It may considerably, it may only a little, but I suppose it's just trying to, I suppose that there's probably something about a fleet of foot as information emerges, and obviously as the council seeks to set its budget, which will be at a different time frame to when the NHS sets its budget. So I suppose it's just I just kind of wanted to raise that, because I mean, I think and I've said it in more than one place. I've an anxiety across the piece that we're not necessarily getting balance as to where the risks are sitting, and they may be sitting in a different place to where there may be a greater risk sitting in a different place to where we think it is, that will have an impact on something else on our risk register.
Yeah, I understand the point. I'd agree with that, Fiona. I mean, timescales are going to be very difficult this year. I mean, we know the Chancellor is standing up sometime about now to announce tax cuts. We know that's going to have an impact on Scottish Government budgets, possibly even this financial year. And I think there's going to be some sort of mini financial event, which seems to be the new buzzword, over the next few weeks. So there may well be issues coming there that we need to consider. Yeah, again, that might be something we want to think about in relation to the next paper, in terms of future risk and how we do make sure that there is good alignment between partner risks and IGB risks, and the interrelationship between the two, which are clearly crucial. Any other questions or comments on this paper? Stephen?
Just to highlight that further on, we do have the risk management strategy within the papers today, and part of that looks at our overall approach to risk management. Still more thunder here, but when we look at that paper, you'll see that it's not a final risk management strategy, because there are some areas that still need to do further development work on, but that, and also the paper that Hugh will present next, will actually show that we have tried to do some sort of alignment with the risk register, the strategic risk registers for our partner organisations, alignment with Falkirk Council and with NHS Forth Valley Board, to hopefully take on board the type of point that Fiona is making there.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Okay, can we agree the recommendations on item 5 then, and we'll move on to item 6. Hugh, is this the one you're going to present?
Morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for this is my first time at meetings, so I'll be happy to take any questions which you have. This is the first performance report we've provided to committee, and it follows up on an internal audit recommendation that we provide an annual report. So this first report is for the period June to March, and future reports will be on an annual basis. And we plan to put those in sync with the annual governance statement. One of the key reasons for that is that both the IJB and each of its partners produce an annual governance statement. So a lot of what we're drawing together in this report is actually attempting to provide a balanced assessment of the risks and assurance from a range of different sources. I won't go through all sections of the report, but I will draw your attention to some key sections. So, first of all, we have summarised the key sources, the key reports that we've drawn on. So, as Stephen mentioned, we have an IJB risk strategy, but that's actually closely based on the NHS and Council's risk strategies, and both partners have actually reviewed their strategy within the last year. The annual governance statements were considered in June, and we have looked at those and taken on board key comments, and we've already discussed the corporate risk registers. And what you'll see later on is that we have also given a comparison of the different risk registers across the partnership, and that attempts to answer some of Fiona's questions about how do we make sure that if there's risks emerging within partners, or if the scoring, for example, is changing, then we in future can start to pick up on those changes. We've also included what we call the through lens of defence model, which is our key source of assurance. So when we're pulling together a risk assessment or doing a deep dive or governance statement, we're trying to look to see what are the key documents which might already be in place, which give us a good sense of how that risk is being managed. So when we're doing a risk assessment, we're not doing it as a blank canvas. We're most often looking at what evidence do we already have and putting some of that together to see where there's gaps or additional information. And I think that goes back to part of the question that Tony was raising about making sure that we have clear dates on a clear target dates and risk appetite, because when we start to look at those different sources of assurance, we're starting to build a better understanding of what the dates are behind those. So going forward in the strategic risk register, it will be a lot more measurable. Key point to emphasise also is that whilst both partners have different risk strategies and the look and feel from is different, the principles are very, very similar. So we're both trying to make sure that risks are well managed and there is clear target risk and or appetite, albeit we might use different language and approach to tackle that. And the report also contains a summary of the risks in March 2021 and June 2022. And as you'll see, there were 10 strategic risks at the start of that period and 9 at the end. The only one which was changed was directions, which was deleted. In terms of operational risks, I think this also goes back to Fiona's earlier question about making sure that if there's changes to risks within both partners, that we capture it. So myself and the risk management team for NHS are undertaking a review of the council and NHS service or divisional risk registers. And on the back of that, what we'll actually do is make sure those are in sync with the IJB risk register. So going forward, there's a much clearer escalation process between them. Both partners are also undertaking horizon scanning as part of their corporate or strategic plan work. So again, we'll be looking at what the risks are and making sure those dovetail. I think it's also worth highlighting that myself, Stephen, and the risk management team at NHS are having regular meetings. We are comparing information and we are planning to have deep dives across the IJB. So going forward, this information will start to be more joined up. And the appendix also includes an update on the risk management action plan, and the key point to note is that we have made a lot of progress so far in terms of reviewing the strategy, the risk register. Further work, yes, definitely has to be done, particularly in terms of making sure it's measurable and achievable actions and looking at how we escalate risk. But good progress has been made in the last few months, and I'm happy to take any further questions.
I think you're on mute, Gordon.
Haven't done that in a while, thank you. Thanks, Hugh. Yeah, I think the idea of tying it into annual governance statements makes perfect sense to me, and risk management is one of our key governance tools. And it is good to hear about the work that's going on to align with the partners' risk management approaches. That makes perfect sense to me. So I think this is a really helpful report as we move forward. There are, as you say, a few outstanding actions, but also some really good progress in relation to the action plan. So thank you for that. Any questions, comments, colleagues? No, I'm not seeing any. Can we approve that report then? Okay, and thanks again, Hugh. Where are we back in the agenda? So item 7 then is the risk management strategy. Is that yourself again, Stephen?
It is, Gordon, thank you. Let me just get to the right page here. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to present the IJB's revised risk management strategy, which sets out the principles and approaches to risk management to be applied to support day-to-day activity, decision-making and prioritisation by the IJB. The risk management strategy is part of the response to the internal audit review of risk management arrangements as part of the action plan agreed at the June Audit Committee. So very similar to the last agenda item, both are responses to the risk management action plan. As we noted with the strategic risk register earlier, effective risk management is a fundamental aspect of good corporate governance and plays a key role in supporting delivery of IJB priorities. The establishment of a new risk management strategy was a requirement of the risk management action plan, and the completion of this task will form part of overall assurance in terms of risk management arrangements and the wider governance framework. So I'm sure, just as we've seen the report from Hugh for the last period, the next assurance statement will reflect the work that has progressed with this and other areas. The redrafted strategy is aligned with the NHS Forth Valley risk management strategy, whilst also incorporating necessary elements from the Falkirk Council corporate risk policy. So aligned with both organisations as far as possible. Section 4.3 of the report notes specific areas that have been incorporated into the strategy following the recommendations from the internal audit review. And section 4.4 of the report conversely notes other areas that will require future incorporation, including development of risk appetite and risk tolerance statements, as we've kind of alluded to earlier. So in conclusion, the redrafted risk management strategy provides evidence of progress against the risk management action plan agreed at the June Audit Committee, and it forms part of the overall assurance picture of risk management arrangements. The revised strategy has been developed with specialist support from both Falkirk Council and NHS Forth Valley, and risk management support is expected to continue from both partners to embed risk management arrangements. I probably should have said from the outset of this report, and you'll see that Sarah Mackenzie was the author. Sarah's actually on annual leave today and couldn't be here, and Sophie is in attendance today in a listening role just to pick up any issues that might follow or anything that might be discussed at today's meeting. And so the Audit Committee is asked to consider and comment on the enclosed risk management strategy, and to note that further amendments will be made to the strategy as outlined in section 2.2. The committee is asked to endorse the strategy for onward submission to the IJB board in November this year for approval. And I'll stop at that and ask if there's any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. That's very clear. Yeah, I mean, this is an area what we've been looking to progress for quite a while now, and it's great to see it coming towards fruition. I think the strategy is very clear. I mean, obviously, having seen Forth Valley's strategy revised recently, a lot of this is very familiar territory to those of us who are on that board. I think what's also good for me is the clarity of roles, so it's clear what the audit committee's role is in this. And I think the training and development section is going to be very important as we move forward. So as we're taking a new role, then it's important that we are all up to speed with what our roles and responsibilities are and have the skills to do that. So I think the implementation of that is going to be very important. Thank you. Again, any questions, comments, colleagues? Fiona?
Yeah, just a very quick question on that issue of training, learning, development. Obviously, there's members of the audit committee, but in relation to wider board, and apologies if I've missed it in the paper, but I think if you're involved in particular parts, you might have more of a tolerance for a particular risk, whereas when it comes to the board, it might the debate and discussion might sound different. And I just wonder about whether there's opportunities within our further opportunities as we go along, and I suppose continuing to touch on it within the development days around the IJB. That's probably one for Patricia.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. While this committee has the primary role of doing the detailed work, I think all of the IJB members need to have an understanding of risk and what the strategy is trying to do. So that makes perfect sense. I think the seminars are probably the place to look at that. Tony?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, I wrote the original risk management report about the thing, so I think this is a much better risk management strategy. There's a couple of little bits and bobs that I think could be. I'll just contact perhaps via Stephen or Hugh, but it's kind of like, so it says clinical governance, and obviously there should be clinical care, and there's something about thinking about the way that these risks will be allocated to committees and how that will flow through. Just for hearing, but I mean, some of that may not need to be in the strategy, but it's as well to get it sorted now. But I think it's a vast improvement from what was there before. And I will have a couple of comments. I think the other point that was made about the role of the board. In the end, it's you as an audit committee, your primary responsibility, especially if these risks are going to be delegated to other committees, is not to examine the risk register per se. It's to take a step back to think about the overall movement and to think about the system of risk management itself. I think the risk management annual report is very helpful in that regard, but you always have to be careful that in the end, the risk register belongs to the board. And there's a danger that when committees do bits and when the audit committee has a role, it's vitally important that when you get together as a board, in the end, it's not a risk register that's a thing that sits there. These are the risks to the achievement of your strategic objectives. That's what a strategic risk register is. And in a sense, there's nothing more important to a board than that, although it doesn't always feel that way when a risk register goes to the board. So it's important that it's great that you've got all this infrastructure, but culturally, to pick up Fiona's point, the board has to retain responsibility because it's theirs. And the other point I'd make is that obviously you do have a new strategic plan coming, and that will, it does two things. One, some of those risks about how we're going to hit target risk, the strategic plan should answer that. If we're saying we've got a target risk or whatever, 12, you should be able to say from the strategic plan how we're going to get there. So that's an important thing. But doing the work of producing a strategic plan actually gives you a much greater insight into the risks facing you, which will be obviously substantial. So I think there's the two key points there is one, it's a good and a much improved risk management strategy, But secondly, the risk register may well change, and then the strategic plan will be fundamental to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will need to look at whether there is need for revision when the new strategic plan is finally agreed. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, the recommendation then is that we approve this with some amendments to come for submission to the board. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. Item 8 then is the annual audit internal plan for 22-23. Tony, this is yours, I think.
So this is a document in two halves or two parts, one of which is obviously vital to the assurance that we can provide you as an audit committee and really key, and the other, quite frankly, is the dullest document in existence. I mean, internal audit isn't necessarily the most exciting of professions, but even by our standards, that document is tremendously dull. But we have to have it because the Audit Charter is the key document that sets out the relationship between us as your internal auditors, and particularly you as an audit committee, the way we work with officers, duties, responsibilities, and indeed authority. So I'm afraid I do have to put it in front of you. There's no choice, and you'll get it again next year as well. So sorry about that. More importantly, focusing on the plan, shared the plan with the Chief Officer and Chief Financial Officer, and now it's in front of yourselves. I would hope that the contents aren't a surprise, because certainly across our piece, we have been stressing the fundamental importance of the strategic plan, particularly for an IJB, which is a strategic body, but the absolute fundamental importance of a new revised strategic plan, which recognises the new realities, the new risk environment, the impact of COVID, the impact of the financial situation. And I know the workforce situation arises from COVID, but that is a tremendous pressure. And we need to think about how we prioritise scarce resources, but also one that addresses the issue of inequality, which has never been fully addressed. And COVID really highlighted that when you look at the death data, when you look at the impact of COVID and the impact on communities. But it also shone a light on the fact that inequalities, we've always talked about it, but has never really been at the forefront. And it's almost an unknown issue, because I have done this work elsewhere, and you find that there's a vast amount even of unidentified need. Because if you work off when people access healthcare services and care services, you're not picking up the people without a voice where those services don't reach. So it's an enormously complicated thing, an enormously important thing. We've actually produced a set of good practice guidance, which I'll share with officers and happy to share with the committee, but we've run that elsewhere. It's been very well received, and it's been successfully applied. And it's a way of looking at the principles, what we call it the 5 Ps. So it's how the board, in particular, the IJB board, is engaged with the process, and whether it understands product, principles, parameters, process, and priorities, and how those are built into the process. And we would like to do that early, so that rather than turning up after the process is complete and then saying, well, you missed out. So it's there at the beginning. It's intended to be helpful. It has been, I think, found very helpful by a lot of both health boards and IJBs. And we recently did it on a completed IJB strategic plan, which went very well. So I think that's a really important piece of work, and it's almost like the foundation stone for moving forward, because our audit plan needs to reflect your strategic commissioning plan, and therefore looking at that and understanding that is key. And we'll do other things as well, such as making sure that risks are picked up. We're auditors, we're slightly obsessed with risk, so we will be looking at how you identify and indeed mitigate risk. So that call and response thing with the risk register will be fundamental to this audit. If you're going to get down to a 3, how is that covered strategically? Because you won't do it by operational stuff. have you identified all the new risks? Have we fully thought about the workforce pressures, the workforce availability over the next 3 years? All that stuff. So it's a wide-ranging audit, and I think that's, for us, it's a piece of work we've run elsewhere and found it very successful and valuable. And the other one, of course, is workforce. And I'm sorry to come across as a prophet of doom again, but workforce financial pressures will be huge. But there is an argument, and I've heard it echoed within the corridors of the Scottish Government, is what's the point giving health boards and IJBs and anyone money if they can't actually recruit the staff to spend it on? And we know that the workforce pressures, particularly for IJBs across the range, as I discussed earlier, will be absolutely key. So you as an IJB need to understand those. You need to understand how they perhaps limit your ability to deliver everything you want, but also how are you going to address those? And one of the key things, again, is at the moment, you are reliant on partners. So we are running, certainly from the health side, we're running workforce planning audits, but you rely on your partners to deliver certain things, to deliver your workforce, to have strategies that are effective. And you need assurance on that, and you need to know that they know it's happening. And that isn't always the case, we've found across the piece. So it's an absolutely fundamental risk. And as an IJB, you need to understand that strategically across the 4 sectors: health, council, private sector, and indeed third sector. So that's the audit. And I think it, from our perspective, those things were chosen very carefully. And yes, there are audits we're doing elsewhere for the same reasons because of the pressures, but it does mean that we do have the ability to look across, see what's good, and I'm afraid I can also say learn from other people's mistakes. So I think there is real value in those audits, but in the end, you're the audit committee. So you have to be happy that those are the key things that we should look at. So I'd now throw it open to you for any questions or comments you may have. And if anyone's read the audit charter with great interest and has questions on that, then I'd be more than happy to answer questions on that. You're on mute, Chair, again.
Yeah, I just noticed there. That's twice today. It's unusual for me. I think that the focus areas are clearly the important ones. I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree with you on the workforce challenges and the fact that those are national issues rather than just Falkirk issues, and they do run right across the whole gamut of health and social care and different providers. So I think it will be very interesting to see what that particular part of the audit comes up with. I'm very comfortable with the plan and the focus within it on strategic planning and workforce. I don't know if anyone else has comments or questions. No, I'm not seeing anything. Can we agree that then as the plan for the coming year, or the year that we are already into? Okay, thank you. Can we move on then to item 9, which is the audit report and inspection overview? Stephen?
Yes, thank you very much. So this report provides an overview of national audit, scrutiny and inspection reports since the previous audit committee back in June 2022. A total of 11 reports are listed, 4 by Audit Scotland, 3 by the Care Inspectorate and 4 from the Mental Welfare Commission. The Audit Committee agreed back in June 2019 to receive a National Audit and Inspection Report overview as a standing agenda item. This arrangement recognises that reports may also need to be considered elsewhere, but it's recognised that as a minimum all national reports should be noted by Audit Committee. The table in section 4.1 lists 4 national reports that have been published, with a brief overview of their content summarised in sections 4.2 through to 4.5. The local government in Scotland 2022 report is the second in a series of reports, and it builds on the previous report. It's got three main themes: responding to the external environment, organising the council, and meeting local needs, addressing inequality. The report includes exhibits and case studies to illustrate issues and practice across councils across Scotland. Scotland's finance response to COVID-19 outlines a fiscal context in which Scottish Government, IJBs and public bodies have been operating since March 2020 and draws on evidence gathered from across the public sector. Integration Joint Board's Financial Analysis 2020-21 noted that overall funding to IJBs increased by 11.9% in 2020-21, largely reflecting an increase in funding in response to COVID-19. The report considered the medium and longer term financial outlook and noted significant financial sustainability risks, uncertainty of future funding, rising demand, and the potential impact of a national care service. It noted the importance in particular of recurring savings delivery to maintain services and transform future service delivery. And finally, the fourth report, Fraud and Irregularity 2021-22, shares risks and case studies to support the Scottish public sector in prevention of fraud. The report includes 7 case studies and notes the level of fraud is a very small proportion of the 2021-22 Scottish budget. Despite new challenges, auditors have found most bodies have responded well by introducing new systems, processes and controls. Section 5 notes the 7 inspection reports issued since the previous audit committee. These are routinely presented to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. And then back to section 2 in the recommendations. The audit committee is asked to consider and comment on the content of this report. Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Stephen. And many of the issues that we've been talking about, of course, highlighted there. We know the position there. Okay, any questions, comments, colleagues? No, can we agree with the recommendations then? Okay, that takes us to item 10, which is the government statement improvement actions. Stephen.
Thank you. So another one of our regular reports. The report provides an update on progress to implement a range of improvement actions identified through the annual governance statement and from various internal and external audit recommendations. It's a standing item to regularly track our progress. And section 3.3 of the report notes there are 10 live improvement actions with 3 on track and 7 either delayed or unchanged. And that reflects the system pressures, capacity challenges, and the ongoing pandemic impact. A high level of the 10 actions and their current status is attached in an appendix as Appendix 1. And the Audit Committee, excuse me, is asked to note the progress on the improvement actions. A very quick canter through that one, Gordon.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, there are a few that are delayed and kind of interrelated. I'm looking at kind of 8 and 9, which are kind of tied together. There is a lot of work ongoing there, particularly in relation to 9 and work around hosting arrangements. Is there any idea of timescales on the completion of that work?
So the chap, oh, sorry, I see Patricia's hands up there. Do you want to come in first, Patricia?
No, I'll wait for you. That's fine.
Okay. So I guess the challenge here, Gordon, is that for a number of these actions, we have to deliver them in collaboration with our partners. So for the a number of these actually tie in with the integration scheme, and for the integration scheme, we need to progress them with both the council and the NHS board, and there have been delays. There has been some progress certainly, but there's been delays in getting us over the line with that, so we really do need a bit of a push to bring that to a conclusion. I was going to say something else and I've now forgotten what it was. I guess I was going to just mention that in terms of these actions, because a number of them are similar in nature, you will see when we looked at the annual accounts and agenda item 4, we regrouped the governance statement in that to try and present them differently. I think for the next one of these reports, we will likewise try and regroup so that the various actions relating to integration are all grouped together, and other audits. So we'll segment it differently next time, hopefully. Pull them together, because you're right, there's a common thread there in terms of integration scheme with a number of these actions. But I don't know if that answers your question, hopefully.
No, that makes sense in terms of process, Stephen. Thank you. Patricia.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give the board assurance that this has been the subject of 2 recent meetings between the IGB chair, the NHS chair, and the 3 local authority chief execs, myself and Stirling and Clack's chief officer, and the chief execs across the system, and Margaret and myself have had a subsequent meeting and have a plan in place to conclude the plans for integration, including the update of the integration scheme and the other items which Stephen's referred to. You'll be aware it's been a recurring item on our audit reports, and it's one that we're really committed to concluding. We can provide further updates at the next audit committee. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Patricia. Tony?
Just quickly, I think picking up the earlier theme about all papers should refer to risk. It was in the risk management strategy. It's a very difficult thing to do globally in that way, section 5.1 or whatever it is. But I wonder if it'd be helpful, just in terms of the audit committee understanding consequence, for these actions to have some kind of reference to the original grading or some kind of way of assessing risk. So, you know, certainly as internal audit, and I'm sure the external auditors are the same, they generally put in something that says, this is how worried you should be by this thing. And the second part of that is that would have changed given COVID. So, you know, across the base, and I've had this conversation with a few of my clients, bluntly speaking, there were things that used to bother us that I just can't get excited about anymore, because in a post-COVID environment, yeah, they're just not things that you're going to worry about in the context of a much riskier, broad risk environment. But there might be other things that become more important, and I wouldn't think you'd want to go through those at the moment. But I think it'd be helpful just to have some kind of feeling of risk, you know, maybe the original recommendation, and maybe just going through and having a bit of a clean up and deciding, you know, whether some of those things we'd still want to keep on. You know, if something's been hanging around for ages and no one's died, you can think, well, are they still important? Or is it the fact that they're going to be more important? But just maybe doing that little bit of risk assessment and tidying it up so that as an audit committee, you've got a signpost to say, this hasn't been delivered, should I be concerned or not?
Yeah, that makes sense, Tony. Thank you. Stephen, perhaps you can have a thought about that when you're resegmenting the report for next time.
I think that's an ideal opportunity to do exactly that. Resegment it, look at what the priorities are, re-evaluate the risks and see which ones ought to still remain there. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay,
that's great. Thanks very much, everyone. Can we move on to item 11 then, which is the internal audit review of resilience?
That's me again. Thank you. Right, 2 seconds. Okay, so agenda item 11 presents the findings of the internal audit review, I beg your pardon, of the IGB's resilience and business continuity arrangements as a category 1 responder, and presents an action plan to address the review recommendations. The IGB is subject to internal audit as part of its financial management and internal control arrangements. Internal audit services are provided on a 3-year rotational basis by the NHS Fife, Tayside and Forth Valley Internal Audit Consortium and by Falkirk Council's Internal Audit, Risk and Corporate Fraud team. The current service is provided by the NHS Audit Consortium. The review of resilience and business continuity arrangements as a Category 1 responder formed part of the internal audit work plan for the last financial year, 2021-22, as agreed by Audit Committee on the 5th of March 2021. The final report, which is presented today, incorporates the formal management response from the Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer, and that final report is presented at Appendix 1. Section 4.2 notes the report provides limited assurance and summarises in Table 1 the key areas for improvement. There are 7 numbered recommendations across subheadings of business continuity plans, governance arrangements and resilience, COVID-19 and Brexit, and discharging mandatory duties of the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. Within Appendix 1, I would draw your attention to the bullet points contained within paragraph 2.3, which demonstrate resilience and business continuity in action, despite what has been very challenging conditions with enhanced infection control, new ways of working, and capacity challenges associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So we do have a report here on business continuity and resilience, and I think it's very important just to put that into the context of live actions that have taken place and how we've responded to the pandemic. So while the management response has been embedded in the final report within Appendix 1, for ease of reference, the recommendations and action plan have also been extracted as Appendix 2, and the Audit Committee is asked to note the findings of the audit report and to approve the Resilience and Business Continuity Action Plan presented at Appendix 2. Thank you. Now, I should just say that Stuart Menzies has the Resilience Coordinator with Falkirk Council has came to join us for this agenda item today too. So if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to field them, but Stuart's also here and may be better placed to give an update on some of the current developments along resilience lines. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Stephen, and welcome, Stuart. Is there anything you want to add at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for that introduction, and thanks for bringing me in, Gordon. Probably just a couple of bits of oversight and some things to give a degree of comfort, hopefully, to the Scrutiny Committee, just with regards to work that's ongoing. Rather than go through each of the recommendations, I'll just do a quick summary of work that is currently ongoing. Firstly, in relation to corporate business continuity. Now, clearly, I've focused clearly on Falkirk Council, but that brings in that aspect of the IJB as one of our key services. On the 1st of August this year, we signed a contract with a consultancy, a business continuity consultancy, Continuity Squared. They provide a software package and consultancy process for corporate business continuity. They're well renowned. They provide this service to 6 other local authorities and IJBs across Scotland, along with other Category 1 responders. We are in the process of building up a structure which will allow the software program to operate efficiently. That allows clear audit of business continuity plans. It provides ownership and structure within each of the services, the council services. That includes the Health and Social Care Partnership aspect as well. And the ownership aspect, we now have business continuity coordinators for each of the services, and that includes the Health and Social Care Partnership. This structure building is going to take some time. We're 6 weeks into that just now. I would be hoping for my team to start delivering training out and launch the software package at the latest by the end of the year, and have that software package starting to be run and give us that full corporate approach. So I'm hoping that gives some degree of confidence to scrutiny there, that there is definitely work ongoing to pull all this together. One template, a full corporate structure, and individual service structures as well, which will all be a corporate approach with the 24/7 support of an experienced and recognised consultancy. I'm happy to take any questions on that aspect before I move on to the category 1 side.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Stuart. Thank you. I mean, my question about this was about implementation and reporting, so I think that's covered the issues I was going to raise. Does anyone else have questions? No, I'm not seeing any, so back to you, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. On to the category 1 responder aspect. So there's a number of areas to look at there. First and foremost, I work hand in hand and very closely with Nicola Watt, my counterpart for NHS Forth Valley. Nicola and I have discussed at length the IGB's responsibilities in delivering as a category 1 responder, and who in resilience is responsible for that, whether it's Falkirk Council or whether it's NHS Forth Valley, or how does that knit together? Nicola's chaired 2 meetings already with a working group just to try and field that information out. She put an email out only yesterday to get a 3rd meeting, and I think at that one there'll be a decision whether or not we need a short life working group just to ascertain whether or not, where we go with this, to ensure that there are the interdependencies are picked up and we all understand who is doing what. Nicola and I are quite clear about our responsibilities. It's getting that message down through the IGB and actually working out how it works together. I think we'll get a better understanding, and I refer back to the business continuity aspect. Our consultants, as I said already, provide to 6 other local authorities and IGBs throughout Scotland. They're doing some work on with us to find out how this is embedded in other IGBs, and they're going to feed that back to us. That will allow us to have that further discussion and understand what that structure looks like. The second aspect is the IGB's full responsibilities as a category 1 responder. My team have just started or we've put together a 5-year training strategy, having delivered a training needs analysis to Falkirk Council's corporate management team. Again, that included Patricia and her senior officers in that from the council side. We have our first awareness session taking place on Monday face-to-face at the Foundry in Falkirk, and that will go through our 5-year training strategy and also deliver a further awareness refresher on what the legal responsibilities are as a category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act. I also understand that feeding into the Resilience Partnership, I sit on that with my chief officer, but from the IGB aspect, I understand there is a nomination there for member of staff from the IGB to be sitting on the Resilience Partnership as well. Both Nicola and I will support that member on the Resilience Partnership. So hopefully, again, that's given that degree of comfort. This is work it's recognised and it's work it's ongoing. I do note in the recommendations there is that consideration for an approach to Scottish Government, just to get clearer guidance. And I probably think that's a very important thing to do, because we need to be consistent across Scotland with regards what this responsibility is, and I'm not convinced that Scottish Government have given that clear guidance. Open to questions again, if you don't mind, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart, and I see Tony agreeing with your last point there. So yeah, I think that is important. It does make sense that there is a consistency across the country in how these issues are dealt with. But certainly, I think I now have a better understanding of how all of this knits together and what's going to happen next. So thank you for that explanation. Any other questions or comments, colleagues? Fiona?
Yeah, probably on that point around that consistent approach. I mean, obviously we're talking about NHS for Valley and Falkirk Council and Falkirk IJB, but I suppose that consistency of approach, if we can't get guidance from government at this point about that consistency across Forth Valley, I guess where there's different things happening, potentially at areas that are very close to the border with one another, and I suppose it's just trying to get that picture. If we can't go any further than that, at least ensure that we've got some consistency of approach with our for example, the IJB in Clacks and Stirling, that we're not, at the very least, not working at cross purposes.
Chair, would you mind if I come in there?
Yeah, please do.
I think I'm maybe preempting some of the other questions that are going to come in. Fiona, thank you for prompting that. The business continuity consultancy and software package, when I was negotiating that, I worked closely with Stirling and Clacks Council. It came about just at the same time as we'd signed up or refreshed our mutual aid agreement. And it made sense, we were all in a similar position, it made sense that we all considered signing up to this consultancy. So I'm probably pleased to tell you, and it's something I omitted to tell you, was Stirling Council are 4 weeks behind us, so they have signed up with the same consultancy. So we're starting to join this up. Clacks, I don't know where they are with their business case, but they were close to finalising their agreement to put their business case forward and also sign up with the same consultancy. So effectively, I'd be hoping by the end of the year, the 3 local authorities are all running with the same consultancy and the same software system for corporate business continuity. So I hope that gives that degree of comfort. I have chatted with Nicola Watt from NHS Forth Valley, and Nicola's fully cited on what we're doing in the 3 councils with regards to this and the consistent approach that we're given.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Roger.
Thanks. Thanks, Stuart. I mean, I must admit, out of all the papers for today, that this is the one which I really struggled with because I couldn't really work how our responsibilities as a Category 1 responder were. So it might be useful to if somebody could give some sort of guidance to me for future, because I mean, oh, thanks. I'm glad that Tony's is showing that it's not my fault for not understanding this. Could there be a bit of a background paper sometime, even if just for me, for coming in from in the dark? Thanks.
I mean, if I might, no one's going to give it that information because that's what we don't have.
Right.
No one, that's the point. No one knows what an IJB is supposed to do. And so as auditors, we turn up and say, right, what are you supposed to do? How does the IJB know you're doing it? And we fell at the first hurdle because the Scottish Government, in its wisdom, said IJBs must have a role and they must do things. Didn't say what those things were. And basically, that leaves you a bit exposed. So as auditors, it's not the IJB's fault. But what we're saying is you're exposed because you basically, if things go wrong, say, well, where was the IJB? And you have no idea what you're supposed to do. And bluntly, I'm not sure anyone does. And it's quite an interesting question as to what an IJB as a first responder would do. You're a strategic body. I mean, you know, what do? Do you suddenly produce a strategic commissioning plan? I mean, it's a weird, it's actually an odd situation. Personally speaking, and Stuart may have more of a clue than I do, I have no idea what the role of an IJB would be in those circumstances. But as auditors, I suppose what we're saying is, we don't have a clue what you're supposed to do. Don't think you do. And we're not entirely sure the Scottish Government does, but you're exposed at the moment because, you know, if it goes wrong, you were supposed to be there. So it's quite an odd situation. It's possible, in truth, that the people who wrote it didn't understand, as we've seen previously, the difference between an IJB and an HSCP. But who knows? What we need to do is get clarity from them, because otherwise you're exposed. And if they do have an idea of what you're supposed to do, it'd be really good to know what it is so you can just do it, basically.
Patricia?
Gordon, sorry, Patricia,
yeah,
my apologies. I can possibly answer some of Tony's points there.
Okay.
Would you mind if I share my screen? I just happened to have the training programme for Monday in front of me. If I could just share my screen and give you a quick 30-second oversight. Just confirm you can see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, the 7 items you're seeing on the right-hand side, these are the legislative duties on Category 1 responders. So the IGB now nominated as a Category 1 responder, delivering them slightly different because the other Category 1 responders, the other 7, are individual entities, whereas the IGB is, as it says in the tin, it's a joint ownership between NHS and local authorities. So you need to be able to tick off these as an IGB. Do we have this in place and is it efficient? The 7 aspects to the right hand side there, starting at duty to assess risk. So that is your legal responsibilities. That is why resilience teams exist, and that is the legal responsibilities to deliver under the Civil Contingencies Act. So that's the fundamental principles. So these are delivered individually, most definitely, by NHS Trust and by the council, but it's how they join up, I think, is the question. I think that's the issue that needs addressed from the question to Scottish Government. How does that join up?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, you can see those things, but in the context of a strategic body, not an HSCP, because operationally these things are delivered through the Health Board and Council. It's understanding. So I mean, some of those are fairly obvious. So we obviously had access to these things, but it's what they mean in the context. So duty to maintain emergency plans. Well, the Health Board and the Council have to have emergency plans, and certainly from our point as internal auditors, we reviewed the Health Board and made some comments and how things could be improved. What does it mean for an IJB to maintain business continuity plans in the context of emergency? Promoting business continuity presumably makes sense in the sense of when you issue directions, you could say, and you must have business continuity plans and you must assure us that they're delivered. But some of these things just are quite difficult to interpret in the context of a strategic body. And that was really what we're looking for guidance on. So you can see what you spoke, you can see the broad outline, and maybe it's just a failure of my imagination, but on some of those I really struggle to understand what exactly they're looking for an IJB that is different from what the Health Board and Council already have to do, because the delivery of the services is under those bodies, albeit through Patricia, but wearing a different hat. So it's really understanding what it means for an IJB. And I'll be quite honest, we discussed it with a variety of clients and amongst ourselves, and we actually couldn't quite work it out, if I'm being honest. And then it would be helpful to us. It's certainly the sort of thing that would be open to a variety of interpretations, and having a single interpretation would be helpful.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Patricia.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, the previous discussion just highlights the reason, the rationale for us putting this on our internal audit plan. It's my understanding that after we were declared as Category 1 responders, the government did intend to produce guidance, and then COVID got in the middle of that. So we were really seeking clarity and to be able to assure the IGB that we were fulfilling any responsibilities we had in that regard. I suppose from my perspective and my simple view of it is that as an integration joint board, the emergency plan and resilience functions are part of those corporate functions that we receive from the NHS board and from the council. So the work that we're doing with Stuart is pulling together that the joint work between the health board and the council, looking to achieve consistency, being sure we have the right information in the right place. The continuity plans have been reviewed. There's clear ownership and delegation of that responsibility, and then that we're able then to test that and provide the assurance that the IGB needs, that in terms of its responsibilities, that those are being discharged effectively. So the work that Stuart joined the council within the last year or so, Stuart, and we've been working really closely across his team, but also with Nicola in NHS Force Valley. So I think it is a question across a number of integration joint boards, but hopefully the work that Tony and his team have done, the work that we're doing with Stuart and Nicola, helps to get us to a point of a better understanding, but also that we can give assurance, more assurance to the board and to the audit committee in the future. Thanks.
I mean, in absence of any more detailed guidance, that seems like a very sensible approach to me. Just making sure that everything is in place and that there aren't any gaps between the two. I think that does seem like a sensible approach. Stuart.
Yeah, just one thing further. I note that Hugh's online, and it's just not to forget the importance of corporate risk and also that aspect of corporate risk joining up between NHS and Falkirk Council as well. So that's just one to alert scrutiny of as well. There's another key part. So as a position on the resilience partnership, that feeds down from the National Risk Register. It's assessed by the partners on the Resilience Partnership. And then from my aspect, I feed the Resilience Partnership's decisions on the National Risk Register to Hugh, and that then allows Hugh to populate and manage the Corporate Risk Register. I'm not sure that I'm guessing there's a similar process from the NHS side. I see Vicky's online, and Vicky may be able to assist with that. But it's bearing that in mind, is that the joined up approach on the corporate aspect as well, the corporate risk aspect.
Yeah, and we've discussed just earlier this morning alignment of IGB risk register with the corporate registers of the council and the health board, and having an improved strategy for making sure there is coordination there. So again, I think that would feed through quite nicely. Okay, if there's nothing else, and subject to all of the caveats we've talked about, can we approve the report? Great, thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of the agenda then. Is there any other business or anything else we need to cover this morning? No, I'm not seeing anything.